The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is The Art of Being Human with Anthony Winning.
Hello, everyone. Here we are, Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Central, Created in the Image of God. I love that new opening segment that the team put together as part of our rebranding. And I love that we have Anthony Winning with us tonight. He and I have had just a couple of brief talks, but there's so much commonality here. You'll see later when we show a promo video for what he does, the similarity in the fact that we are absolutely traveling the same path. So let's bring Anthony into the studio, get to know him, and launch tonight's show. Welcome, Anthony.
Hello, Wade. Great to be here. Thank you.
So share with everyone where you hail from and what time it is out your way.
Well, actually, at the moment, I'm in New Zealand, in the beautiful New Zealand countryside. And it's just turned 3 p.m., but it's 3 p.m. on Wednesday. So I'm slightly ahead in that sense. So yeah, it's a beautiful spot of the world, but originally I spent most of my time in Australia.
Well, given that you're living in tomorrow, we talk about prophecy from time to time on the show. Perhaps you'll bring us some insights from the future.
Well, who knows?
In any case, we know that you're going to bring us a lot of insights. So what I know about you, based on our brief relationship that we've been developing, is that you are a psychologist, a philosopher, and a seeker of life's deeper truths. That you were in the corporate world and left to pursue a PhD. We'll get to that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
That you've dedicated yourself to exploring the human condition through the lenses of psychology, religion, and philosophy. So we started this show, 2.5 years ago, and that's going to resonate with any of those fans who are here from the beginning or have seen how we've moved and grown and how this is all morphed over time. But speaking of that, let's go back to the beginning of your story, your origin story. So what are the forces that shaped you before you took conscious thought to become who you are today? What world were you born into? The circumstances of you arriving on this planet?
Well, I think in many ways, although I've had a very unusual life, I'm quite an ordinary person in the sense that I still wake up every day. I've got my own issues and anxiety and problems to deal with like everyone else. But I can also see I've had quite an unusual life. I guess the first bit that was unusual is my parents were working overseas. They were both Australian. And throughout most of my life growing up, I managed to live in several different countries and also to do a lot of traveling, which I really found quite fascinating because I can see I'm a person who's just very naturally curious about life and curious about people. So I've noticed some people, they're very happy to grow up in a town and spend their time there, and they don't really have a desire to travel beyond that, which is perfectly fine. But for myself, I really felt a deep curiosity for the world. And I think in that sense, by having that childhood that allowed me to travel and to see different parts of the world, it gave me a bit of an exposure to, I guess, the many different ways that people can see things and I relate to life.
So where were you, which country were you born in, and where were your parents working at that time?
Yeah, I was born in the Philippines, and my parents were working there. I spent about 8 years of my childhood there before coming to Sydney in Australia. And after a few years, we moved to London for a while. And after that, I came back to Sydney and finished my schooling and did my university studies. And only a few years ago did I move to New Zealand, but it's been a beautiful sea change. So I very much
So
enjoyed it.
did you learn Tagalog when you were living in the Philippines?
Uh, Apologies, I missed that.
Did you learn Tagalog? That's one of the main languages there.
Unfortunately not. Yes, I'm sure I spoke a few words along the way, but I've forgotten at this point in time. I definitely have a huge number of fond memories of the people there and growing up there. But no, unfortunately not.
So how do you believe those travels and that exposure shaped you? Did you have an easy time relating to the other kids when you ended up back in Australia, or
Hmm.
did you feel a little bit like an outsider? How did that go for you?
Yeah, that's a bit of a good question. I mean, definitely, I feel like I'm a little bit odd. My accent is definitely not Australian. Most Australians ask where I'm from. And you're right. It's just been unusual in that sense that because of that, I do feel a little bit like the odd one out. Having said that, I think the most important thing is how you connect with people, how you relate with people. There's a lot of people now from all over the world living in different places. So I guess naturally we kind of encounter a lot of different variety. And I think if you treat people with respect and for me a genuine curiosity in them and what's going on for them, I think that's something that just resonates with people. So I think that's the biggest factor. I think really my life's been more about learning how to, I guess, better connect with people, learn to be a bit less anxious, try and be more confident. All these kind of things, I think, all feed into being more at ease with myself and therefore being to connect more with people. But yes, definitely in my childhood, I could see definitely felt a little bit like the odd one out, and but nothing that I really thought held me back in any way. But it was something I was a bit aware of. My background and upbringing was a bit unusual.
So then, as you're telling about this, I'm thinking and relating, of course, my own experience, as we all do. And there's certain things that were similar. I wasn't. My parents were. My mother was Canadian. My father was from Sweden, so I had a foreign father, if you will. But I was born in Canada, and then we all moved to America, where we were all foreigners. Of course, when I say America, United States, it's always funny. It's the continent of America and then the country of America. It's kind of like telling people that you were in Hawaii, right? And then they say, "Oh, where were you?" And I was like, well, "Which island were you on?" We're like, "Hawaii." "Yes, but which island?" "Hawaii." Right? We were on Hawaii. "Yes, but which island?" "Hawaii." Right? Because the Big Island. So that's why it's called the Big Island, to avoid that silliness. Of course, when I say America, it's common parlance. Well, everybody knows you mean the United States.
Mm.
But anyway, it's just funny. But this gets to the point that I'm making, which is the sort of parochial my view that we grow up with, that doesn't allow you to see things from the other perspective, and that has to maybe be brought to your attention, right? So one of the jokes about Canada is the national identity of a Canadian. Do you know what that is?
No.
They are not American.
I think New Zealanders might feel that a little bit about Australians, but yes.
Right. Exactly. So they form part of their identity as to what they're not, which is kind of maybe a little bit psychologically off balance in a way. Anyway, the point is that when I grew up and then I ended up in Sweden and coming back,
Mhm.
I felt very much an outsider, very much, and it kind of formed and shaped a little bit who I was. But I'm reflecting now that today, of course, we constantly hear about diversity and inclusion, right? Of
Mm.
every imaginable difference, and some that we never would have imagined in the past, right?
Mm.
almost as though, now we have Martians and Venusians in our midst and we have to accept them, right? So, or like this cat licorice here, right? So it just jumped up in my lap. The point being that back then, when I was growing up in those circumstances, it was less usual, less accepted, more different. And I very much felt that. To turn my camera off for a second here to rebalance it after the cat made us all lose focus. Hang on. That sometimes works. One more try here. It just bothers me and puts me off when my camera is out of focus. I'll just live with it. Maybe it'll change. So anyway, my point was, over time, we also see major differences in the world around us, and those things shape us as well. One of the reasons we dive into your background is so that we can try to gain a little bit more deep understanding of those different perspectives and go a little bit deeper than just tolerance and a little bit more towards understanding those differences, understanding how and why somebody else views it differently. We were talking briefly a moment ago before the show about a trip to Russia that you made, and it was a trip to Russia that I made in the era where Gorbachev was abducted, where I had this epiphany that no matter how wrong the idea seems to you, people grew up in circumstances where they're very much convinced that idea is right. And they're adopting and adapting that idea because they think they're right. And that is one of the aspects of our shared humanity. We all think we're right. Everybody believes what they believe because they think it's correct. They think it's right. And no matter how nonsensical it seems to us, other people are completely convinced that they are righter than we are. So how does this factor into your work? Looking at philosophy, psychology, having a PhD. Maybe tell us a little bit about those studies and sort of your coming of age.
Yeah, so I'd really say probably in my early 20s, after having in many ways what was a very conventional upbringing, I really became curious about what exactly is life about, and really why are we here? I'm very much aware that some people only look at these questions when they're about to check out, and find that a bit peculiar because it's kind of like reading your car's instruction manual just before you sell the car. Nevertheless, so after going back to university, after working in computing, I studied psychology, which I very enjoyed. I definitely enjoyed the process of study and learning more about people and myself. But there was something I felt that was kind of missing in my studies, and that was really a deep, holistic picture. So a lot of the things you'll study in psychology will be small little theories. You might have something like you're more likely to get help in an emergency if there are less people around, which is counterintuitive. But really, how do we put all these different things together, and how do we understand what makes us tick? And there's definitely a few theorists in psychology that very much looked at the big picture, whether that's Freud or Skinner or Rogers. But what I really found deeply fascinating is when I started looking into religion, because I think in a way, both religion and psychology are trying to answer the same questions. What makes us tick? Why do we experience difficulties? How do we deal with them? All these kind of questions are central themes, I think, in both areas. And I really felt that through my studies and looking at religion, there was a huge amount of insight in there. And that just really brought me to want to keep looking more deeply. And it's a process I've been, pursuing ever since.
Well, I think that's a great moment to hit the pause and go to our first commercial break, which is a promo video about who and what you are and what you do. And when we come back, we're going to dive into a little bit more this this connection that you began to make with religion. So don't go anywhere. This is Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson, here with Anthony Winning. We'll be right back after this.
We all ask the same questions, just in different ways. Why are we here? What is life all about? And what does it mean to be human? At Life in Depth, we bring together insights from religion, psychology, and philosophy to explore the most profound questions in life.
Welcome to Life in Depth. Religious texts can reach a deeper truth than science is able to capture, because in a universe that is fundamentally mysterious, it leaves room for an element that resides beyond words.
Join us on a journey of reflection and discovery. Explore more at lifeanddepth.com.
Welcome back. I wanted to ask Anthony, so when did you start Life and Depth? That's DEPTH. And what was the catalyst for doing so?
Well, after I finished my thesis, I looked back on it and I felt a deep interest in the work that I'd done. I felt that by being able to look at these things, I saw aspects of myself reflected back in what I had discovered. And I really felt it'd be very strange just to sort of finish that process there. It just didn't feel right. And not only that, as I was working my way through my thesis, I kept coming up with connections and ideas that I thought were interesting and relevant, and they didn't fit into the theses, so I couldn't write about it. But I felt I had a huge amount of material I could work on and share. So I put the website together, and really, I guess my motivation was to do something that I love and enjoy, and to also keep exploring, because I really feel life's a very mysterious thing. If you really dig deep enough, I'm not sure as a human being we're actually going to get answers to the deep mysteries of life. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep looking and exploring. I think there's a lot of insight that can be gained from that. And really, it was just a way that I could continue doing the whole process that I found helped my development, and hopefully had something maybe other people would find interesting and helpful.
So why do you think we won't get necessarily the answers that we're looking for?
Because the limits of human comprehension is relatively small compared to the vastness of the universe. We naturally, as human beings, we take a very human perspective. So we might think that we found out certain information about how the earth was formed, and therefore we kind of feel that we have a complete picture. But realistically, we don't know what we don't know. And science will be able to tell us how things might be connected together, the relationship, the effect that two different things have on each other. But I'm not sure it ever really tells us the deep questions of why. I mean, why is there something rather than nothing? What was there before the Big Bang? Do we have a soul? And if we do, how does that influence how we live life? These are big questions that I don't think we're going to get answers to unless a few of us end up as prophets or enlightened, which I'm not holding my breath for in my case, for sure. But really, I think there's only been a handful of people in human history who kind of have been in that position or had that deep insight and have been able to share it. And for them, they talk directly from their experience. But unfortunately for me, and I presume lots of other people, I don't have a direct connection to those deeper questions, those deep mysteries. Yes, I just don't know what there was before the Big Bang as an idea. But these questions are really fundamental.
So My audience knows that I'm a
Mm-hmm.
Baha'i, and the Baha'i faith has its own set of
Mm-hmm.
writings, whereas the Baha'is also accept the writings of other religions. One of the principles, oh, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a principle. One of the statements in the Baha'i writings is that there are two books of Revelation, and I may be mangling it now and not quoting it properly. This is how I understand it. There's no clergy in the Baha'i faith, and I certainly have no standing. So take what I'm saying with a full salt shaker of salt, not just a grain, in terms of representing anything in the Baha'i
Mm-hmm.
faith. But uh, the point is, there's the revealed word of God. The Bible talks about Jesus being the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Right? That's from John 1:1. So what came before the Big Bang? Well, we have this revealed knowledge that says this is what came before the Big Bang. The other book of Revelation, according to the Baha'i writings, is the creation
Mm-hmm.
itself. So the study of the material universe, science is reading the book of Revelation.
Yes.
And as I've joked, we will have the unity of science and religion when both realize that their curriculum comes from the same source. But of course, the scientists will never necessarily realize that, because if the book of Genesis, the first chapters of Genesis and the first chapter of John and other revealed
Mm-hmm.
texts are correct, then the divine exists outside of time and space, because time and space was created by the divine. So living inside of time and space, there's no way we can ever comprehend what's outside of it,
I think you've very
right? Which is why, so I'll wrap this up quickly and then get your comments, which is why in the Baha'i writings, again, I'll quote this fairly accurately. God is said to be the most hidden of the hidden and the most manifest of the manifest. So that God is all around us all the time, in that sense, imposing God on us all the time. We can't get away from it. You can't escape it. It's all pervasive. It's outside us. It's in us. It's everywhere. But at the same time, you can't find it. You can't. So if you're trying to, you know, show thyself, it won't. It doesn't. You don't get to command it to show itself, right? But if you really truly seek to have a relationship with it, it can share itself with you. But that's why science, with its prodding and probing, will never discover it, because it's the most hidden of the hidden, even though it's the most manifest of the manifest.
What you say absolutely resonates with me. It's been quite interesting because I end up speaking to a number of scientists, and I don't think many scientists study the philosophy of science and actually realize the underlying assumptions that underpin science and what questions science can answer and what it can't. So there's kind of a bit of a error in our thinking where people just equate science with absolute truth. Now, this is possible, it could be correct, but you have to make a number of assumptions. And the big assumption is, as you say, everything is based in physical reality. You can explain it purely through physical reality, or as you say, the manifest. And you're right, if God exists beyond time, space, or anything we can, I guess, put a box around, that's not something we can comprehend with our mind, that wants to put things into boxes, that wants to measure things. And it's not something that's going to reside in the realm of science. So yeah, this is probably, I think, one of the most critical challenges in religion. How do you take something that is transcendent, incomprehensible, and kind of cannot be defined in any way, but come and translate that in a way that people could relate to? Because if it's too abstract, it's going to feel like philosophy. But of course, if you make it concrete, it's distorted. So there's always going to be this challenge in religion between looking at a question that's kind of can't be answered because God doesn't reside in an answer, and make it in a way that people can relate to and connect to it as part of their lives. And I think that's the big challenge of religion.
So let's shift gears and begin to address a question that you and I raised earlier, given that your topic is the art of being human, right? And the big questions, right? Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? Right? Those are questions, related to us. We could also ask, what else is out there, right? Did somebody make me, and how, and who did it, and why? Would be another way to look at some of these questions. Or, if it's a random chance, then is there any purpose? Is there any meaning whatsoever? If it just sort of happened somehow, all of these are the questions. But you and I then talked about the barriers that we have within ourselves to come to answers that are satisfying. And these barriers are, let's call it cognitive dissonance, which is holding opposing ideas without being able to resolve them, without being able to maybe even realizing it. So we've got, confusion going on in our heads. Or denial, right, about certain truths about ourselves, how we are, how we treat other people, what we've done, that maybe wasn't so great, or maybe even is wrong, and why. And those things where we're hypocritical in our thinking and our behavior. And we talked a little bit about how does one, well, let me put it in this context. You've said you're a seeker of life's deeper truths. What about when we oppose ourselves in finding the answers is really my question there.
So to look at how exactly, why do we distort things, and how do we, as I guess you mentioned earlier, how do we kind of potentially bridge across that human distortion? It's a really good question. I feel that even if you look purely from psychology, it would say that this is quite a big challenge. Freud really sort of brought the idea that a lot of our forces that are impacting us, we're not consciously aware about them. So that already is a challenge, that maybe a lot of what influences how we think and behave, we don't actually realize ourselves what's going on. And of course, the other thing is, maybe you tell someone that's something that might be true, but they have a strong reaction to it. They can't actually listen to it. I think when I look at religion, one way they've tried to address it is to use symbols and images and stories. When I look at things like mythology, as far as I can assess, it's trying to explain to us about ourselves in a way that's probably just one step removed. We can look at someone like Icarus, and we can see Icarus's pride in action and what it costs him. But that's quite different to the pain we might feel when we reflect on our own pride and the cost it's had on our lives. So in that sense, I think there's one way that religion tries to talk to us and show us ourselves in a way that's hopefully not too threatening. And that's exactly what Freud said happened in our dreams. Our dreams come to us with symbols and images to show us part of ourselves that if we were told directly, it would be too uncomfortable. It's really, I don't feel I've got an answer to the question of if two people see something differently, how do you bridge that? I guess potentially, if people want to learn a deeper truth about themselves, but it's difficult to see, I can only presume it's going to be a process. There's probably no magical silver bullet. And I don't know. I just keep trying to remind ourselves we're all human beings. There are things in every person that's beautiful and I can appreciate, and kind of maybe going a bit more from there than trying to get caught up in other things. But yes, it's a difficult question. I mean, I've had people tell me things about myself, and I've reacted and refused to believe it. And then down the track, when I'm in a better space, I can see it's true and it hurts. So I can also see why it's difficult for us to see it. No questions.
Well, so a lot of thoughts are coming to mind. There are two that I'll try to hold and focus on. The first one is, of course, Freud's student, his protege Jung. went deeper into dreams, right? And he also went into dream typology and collective consciousness, right? Which, in the context of you talking, I'm looking at that now in a slightly different light, which is our common set of beliefs that we've adopted. And we've heard a lot in recent years, some of us who are, looking and asking questions, perhaps more than others, about dramatic shifts in society, right? Such as what happened with COVID, and the disinformation and misinformation campaigns that have been talked about, and how do we even know anything that's true these days based on social media and the echo chambers and all that. So you've got this thing called mass formation psych. People talk about entire countries and all of civilization succumbing to a bad idea and a wrong idea that's being projected. Well, the dream typology and the collective unconsciousness that Jung was looking into, and your discussion about how stories, mythology helps us maybe pose some of those questions. It's interesting to think about these things in that context. That was one thought that I had. The other one is also that was sort of triggered by this, the difference between mythology and the religious revelation, which many would say, well, that's just mythology, right? Many would say the entire Old Testament is just a bunch of myths, right? It's all mythology. Whereas the people who study mythology, they don't believe that it really happened. So they're only looking at it as a story, a fantasy, as some kind of groping effort, perhaps, to understand. And one person's way of representing their understanding by starting this myth that is powerful and takes on a life of its own. Whereas in the religious books, many people say, fundamentalists in particular, no, that really happened, right? The flood really happened. There really was a Noah, right? There really was a Garden of Eden. There really was an Adam and Eve. You know what I mean? So therefore, those things are not viewed as myths, and don't you dare call them myths, right? So they may then have, in a sense, a more power or a different power. And then there's writings later in the Bible, for example, that say the word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword, cutting asunder the flesh and the spirit, cutting to the soul, if you will, really getting hard and deep to the core of the matter. And then we're more confronted with it. Whereas a myth is like, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that might mean, whereas it's not cutting to the heart. So so these things have a similarity, these stories, right? On the one hand, the myths, and on the other hand, the many, many, many stories in holy writings. Is there power in them, or is it the power that we give them by our adherence and our belief in them that makes them different? Or what's your reaction to all this that I'm just musing about here?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting point to think that, as you say, an idea might really sort of be prevalent in a society. I'd have to conclude there's something in people in that society that they resonate with that idea. And for people who don't necessarily see any value in mythology or kind of some of the stories of Genesis, I'd have to question, why are we still talking about them thousands of years later? I mean, there has to be something to it. It has to resonate with a part of ourselves. And I think a lot of what you're talking about is, how do we go and interpret and look at mythology and scripture and these kind of stories? That's a big question in itself. It's interesting to me, like, we get taught how to read plays at school or how to read books, but I don't really hear about people going to learn how to read scripture. But there's, of course, a huge area of study devoted to this, and there's some very beautiful traditions. I quite like the tradition that came out in Judaism of Pardes, or the orchard, where it sees scripture as being containing multiple layers of meaning that you can read it at. And yeah, it's something that I think you have to be very attuned to. And I guess you have to be aware how you're approaching something like scripture or how you're approaching something like mythology. And that, I believe, will hugely inform what you'll get out of it. There must be great depth to these stories because we are still learning from them thousands of years later. And, that's quite remarkable.
Well, those are really great points. And again, I'm just sort of almost in awe of how closely aligned, our discussion and our thinking is. This is actually a perfect segue into our next commercial break. There's a man who we've had on the show a couple of times. We'll probably have him back again soon. We're working together on the re-release of his first book and subsequent 2 books. This is Joseph Atman. You mentioned philosophy of science. He has a PhD in the philosophy of religion. And what got me really intrigued in his work was he reinterprets the Garden of Eden story and made it hugely relevant to me in a new and different way. And it engendered a lot of deep thought and wonderful conversation. So I'm going to play a quick promo for his book, which is out there and available now in anticipation of the sequel and then the completion of the trilogy. It's called A Philosophical War. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more with Anthony Winning.
In a world where the battle of minds goes unnoticed, one man dared to challenge the very structure of consciousness itself. Joseph Atman proudly presents the first part of his groundbreaking collected work, A Philosophical War. Atman's mission is to expose humanity's most elusive adversary, the structure of its own consciousness. He argues that the modern human condition is plagued by a thought process that inflicts unnecessary suffering. This thought process, like a stealthy enemy, wages war against our nature. Atman's quest is both daring and revolutionary, to overthrow and replace the current prevailing conscious structure. He identifies the enemy within and seeks a more coherent and powerful ally. With digestible bursts of epistemological guerrilla strikes, he pierces the lines of everyday thought patterns. This counteroffensive offers a new perspective, one that challenges the way we perceive reality. Atman asserts that humanity's consciousness has relied too heavily on thought alone. He introduces being with, a relationality that harmonizes humanity with the world around us. But the battle doesn't end there. Atman reinterprets the early chapters of Genesis. He calls for the removal of contemporary notions of God while offering a profound argument for God's existence. Filled with intrigue, simplistic insights, and mystical yet realistic hope, this book is a potential landmark work. A Philosophical War by Joseph Atman. Available at Amazon.
That looks really interesting. Absolutely. It's funny that came up because I knew I was going to be on the show, and I just published a video on understanding the human condition through the stories of Genesis, which is going to be a multi-part series. And the first part's Adam and Eve, but it's such a rich story with so much depth to look into and to unpack. There's always more insights to be gained from something like that.
One of the founding figures in the Baha'i faith, Abdul Baha, gave an explanation of Adam and Eve in which he suggested one could look at Eve as man's soul and Adam as the physical body. Perhaps the whole rib idea, right, taken from him and part of him. Anyway, but then he concludes by saying, and there are many other meanings and interpretations, and you should seek them out. So he gives one perspective and says this, but then this isn't it. This is one way to look at it, one way to derive a whole lot of value out of it. I've got some of my own that I've worked up over the years as to how to look at this. But what Joseph Atman does, I'll just give a little bit away here, is that the forbidden fruit, as it's called, represents our ability to form our own ideas and our own concepts, right? You will know good and evil, and you will become like God, the serpent said. And Eve desired this, right? And so she engaged with reality, and Adam engaged with reality with conscious thought. And once you form a concept of a thing, you're now engaging with that concept. You're not engaging with the reality of that thing. In philosophy, you get to the essence of a thing, or what's the word that I'm looking for here? The nature of a thing. It's nature, what it really is, versus how it presents itself, right? And I shared with Joseph, and this is one reason we're working together, that you're describing the first commandment: "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Those are false gods, and the minute you form a concept of God, your concept of God is a false God, because it is not God. And if you're now married to and wedded to your concept and your idea of God, you are worshiping a false God. You're worshiping a God of your own making. But there's no other way to do it, right? So Joseph goes deep into, how do we actually engage with reality, thought? And this is a conundrum, but it's a really interesting way of looking at it, right? We form our own ideas. That's what that tree of the knowledge of good and evil symbolizes. And this is, this leads to dichotomies and dualism and all, but I like to remind people, whenever we talk about this, of something Paul said. And I've not hear others talk about this, but to me, when the Apostle Paul says, he's talking to the Corinthian church, where there are all kinds of problems, in that sense, he's their therapist, but he's not a therapist. He's just telling them what's what and how they need to behave and what's right and what's wrong. But he says, you are children, and you're like drinking the milk. You have need, and not even that, you have need that somebody teach you again the basics, right? Because you don't have it at all. Then he says, you should by now be consuming meat. And then he says, strong meat belongs to those, and here's the interesting formulation, who by reason of use have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. Now, wait a minute. I thought that's what we were not supposed to do, right? That's the forbidden fruit. Taking of the fruit to know good and evil, versus the tree of life. So you're taking to yourself the prerogative of discerning good and evil. And Paul, then many, thousands of years later, he's the great student of the Bible. He says you should have used your senses, exercise your senses to discern good and evil. You should have been consuming that fruit in a good way, is kind of what he's saying. And I found this to be fascinating when I realized, wait a minute, because we come from this fundamentalist view where that's, the original sin, the forbidden fruit. Stop using, your own human reasoning and trust God, go to God. And here Paul says, well, you should be figuring this out on your own through using your senses, in that sense, studying science and getting the facts from reality. Your thoughts?
Wow. I'll be honest. I'm not sure I can really. I'll have to digest that. I don't really. That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that connection, and I'm at the moment I'm not quite sure how to fit it all together. So I might have to go and have a ponder and get back to you on that one. It's interesting. I didn't realize that was there.
Well, let's segue then, take it into a little bit more abstract, or a little bit broader, and maybe not necessarily abstract, but well, sure, abstract. So the unity of religion and science. Let's talk about that for a minute, because to me that's what that is. On the one hand, you have the religious statement where God says, "Don't do that. Trust me." Trust me, don't trust yourself. Here's I will teach you, I will reveal to you, I will confide in you. That Baha'i verse we wrote, I will confide in you. But then later his apostle, Paul, Jesus' apostle Paul, says, no, you should use your senses, you should exercise your senses to discern good and evil. Well, it's not either or, it's both, right? So it's religion and science.
I guess we have to acknowledge the world that we live in, and it's a physical world, and science absolutely has its place and its benefit. I guess the mistake we make is believing the picture that we see to be all that there is. I think we need to leave a bit of room in our lives for the mystery, for things that we don't know, to be open to possibilities that we may not necessarily be able to comprehend. I think maybe having more awareness of that might step us a bit closer towards things. But yeah, I think it's fair to say science absolutely has a place in life. There's a lot of benefits it's brought to humanity that I'm very appreciative of. So I think maybe it's that everything has its season, everything's got a place.
So one of the things that I find kind of fascinating personally, coming from a fundamentalist background and now being much more open, to what science has to offer. Not that I was ever anti-science. I was just very skeptical, right? And I think rightly so. For example, we talked briefly about the pandemic, mass formation psychosis, which is one phrase that's come out of that from some circles, as people suddenly changed their thoughts and their behavior radically and en masse, and went along with things that they would have perhaps never gone along with previously. And a lot is coming out about how coercive it was in a negative way, and how much havoc was wrought by it. Really, everything from keeping children out of school, arrested development for them, and to damages that's being revealed from having had the vaccine, the so-called vaccine. In my view, it was never a vaccine in the first place. We changed the definition of vaccine in order to pretend that it was. Having said all of that, there's a saying that I heard that really resonated with me, and that is, they told me to follow the science. I followed the money, and I found the science. Right? So there's so much money behind what's called science today, and the research and development departments, which is where science is practiced, right? It's not really science in a pure sense, right? Because it's dedicated, energetic research to come up with a specific solution. Let me give you an example in the medical field. It's well known that there's a profit motive in almost everything. And so a corporation needs to make a profit. It is its purpose as an entity. It has a fiduciary responsibility. If it's not making money, it is negligent. It is criminal. It is criminal for a corporation not to be who have bought a company. So if you're a shareholder and you buy shares of a company, you're doing so because you expect that company to make a profit. It must, by law, be about making a profit. It can't say, well, no, I'm now suddenly a nonprofit, and I'm focused on humanitarian or what's really best for people. No, your purpose is to make a profit. So your R&D departments, your research and development departments, have to make a profit. So when you look at the medical industry, they look at the population as potential customers, and they do market research to say what would sell a lot, and what would sell continuously. So if I can give you a medication that you will have to take for the rest of your life, that's way, way more profitable than a medication that you would take for 20 days and be done and be healed and be whole. So all the R&D is spent on not curing a disease per se, but on providing medications often that can treat its symptoms in such a way that it alleviates some aspect continuously over time, so that you become a lifetime customer of the product that I've just created. So it's not the healthcare industry, it's the sick care industry. Now, I'm presenting only one side of it, and I don't mean to say that it's evil. I don't mean to over-exaggerate. This is just fact. This is just reality, right? So science is often not science at all in the sense of what people think science should be. You follow me? So having said that, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with research and development in science. But you talked about the philosophy of science earlier, you brought that up, right? What kind of questions are you trying to answer, and why?
Well, that's as far as I see it, science is really just a tool of gathering knowledge and insight about how the world operates and making those connections. I think what you're really talking about is how people use sort of the knowledge derived from science and to what purposes and means we use it for. And you're right, there's no nothing in science itself that will tell you what is inherently right or wrong. It's the decisions people are making and how they run things. That's the critical question. We have sort of the same problem in religion. A lot of people look at to the very painful failings of religious institutions and the wrongdoing that's occurred. But in a way, that doesn't touch the fundamental truth that religion may or may not be pointing to. And I think in that sense, it's a good question that we have to ask ourselves in society. How do we want to allocate resources? Where do we want to put our time and money and effort into? How do we want to reward people's work? And look, these are really big questions. And to hear that people are basically looking for profit over the benefit of people, it doesn't surprise me, but yes, it saddens me at the same time.
Well, they have a legal obligation to do so. That's what I was pointing out.
Yes.
Right. And so I want to just throw out another sort of example that just occurred to me. Nothing new to me, but maybe new to some of the audience. And that is that, I would say you can't judge Jesus by his followers. Now, in one sense, maybe you would think you should, I will judge because obviously those are the people following the religion. So if they're all messed up, then something must be wrong at the source. Except that Jesus himself said, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things that I say?" Right? So people want to talk about the person of Jesus and the relationship with Jesus, but what did Jesus actually tell us to do? And are we actually doing it?
Well, all I can observe is in practice, it's very difficult to love your neighbor. I mean, imagine waking up tomorrow and you might make the decision, I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to get frustrated. I'll be kind and patient to every single person I meet. It's incredibly difficult. So
until you get caught off in traffic.
Exactly, right? So I think in many ways, religion is there to lift us up, to give us something to aim towards, to give us a direction. But of course, it's a journey and it's a process. And psychology will tell you exactly the same. It's not easy for us to change how we think, how we feel, how we behave. But if someone's rolling up their sleeves and giving it a go and looking at things and trying to be a better person, I don't know what else we could really do. Really, I mean, that's quite noble in itself. So, yes, it's true. I'm sure there's quite a gap between Jesus and his followers, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't sort of aspire to be step closer towards this.
Well, and in the Baha'i faith, to reference that again, since we do air on a few Baha'i channels as well, there's that same person that I think I quoted earlier, Abdul Baha. He's also known as the perfect example, right? The follower of his father's teachings, and therefore giving us a practical example of how to live. But if you study his life, as we just recently read a book, I had a man on the show called Paul Hanley who wrote a book about what Abdul Baha did in the Holy Land while his father was in prison before it became Israel, in the city of Akka under the Ottoman Empire. And while he was, so Abdul Baha was there while his father was in prison, and he lived in the community and he became very respected. And he bought land and he developed a farming community, and they worked on regenerative farming practices. And I had no idea until recently that the Baha'is played a role in the the creating of the desert blossoming like a rose. For people who have studied the history of the state of Israel today, that area of land, Mark Twain toured it and said, this is horrible. Who would ever want to live here? It's terrible. And the prison city of Akka, it was said it was so vile that the birds that flew over it dropped dead, right? This was not a pleasant, it was completely and totally inhospitable. And then through careful cultivation and agriculture, it's blossoming like a rose. So Abdu'l-Baha was instrumental in doing this and dedicated a lot of his life. He was actually knighted by the British Empire for having produced so much food that it actually helped the British Army in the Second World War. And that's why he received a knighthood, which a lot of Baha'is know about, but they don't know the backstory of how that came about by building a farming community and emphasizing farming and the farmer in a community, and not big agra, right? But small farms and cooperative farming and diverse companion planting, regenerative farming, caring for the soil, all of these kinds of things. Speaking about the practical, right? So let's add, we're going to go to one more commercial break and then look at the audience. But before I go to that commercial break, I wanted to ask you about what was it called again? Something in life and depth.
Oh yeah.
Right. So tell us a little bit practically about what life and depth is and what you're doing and what response you're getting from the world for the work that you're now doing, and maybe participate.
Oh, sure. Yes. Well, the good news is if you go to lifeanddepth.com, the articles and videos are freely available to watch. I really felt while I was doing my PhD thesis that there were a lot of connections. I was seeing the same ideas either in philosophy or religion or in psychology. And the other thing I felt very, very strongly was I occasionally would hop onto YouTube and watch a debate between religious people and atheists. And I was just utterly puzzled why they were arguing, because I felt in a way that it's a little bit like arguing what next week's lottery numbers are going to be. I mean, let's face it, we don't know. So I really felt a better approach would be to look at the big questions or look at these kind of issues and look at the implications from them, kind of to offer an interpretation, and people can do with it what they wish, So in that sense, I felt there'd be a lot to write about, a lot to talk about. The website's got some videos and articles, and there's also the option for those who want to participate. There's a discussion forum, because I felt that it's not always easy to find other people who might have interest in these areas, and also a space that you can talk about topics like religion and so on in a respectful and hopefully a way that people can learn and develop from. So that was really the intention behind it. It's a fairly new project. I basically been starting it out, but I've been very happy with the response I've been getting. And for me, there's no question it's going to be my life's work. I'm in for the long haul. And it's just
so it's the words life,
beautiful,
and depth, altogether, lifeanddepth.com. I'm putting that in the chat right now so that people can see it across all channels and go there and review it. And now we're going to go to quick commercial break. Another sponsor is the Royal Falcon Foundation, which I personally was involved in founding. And this is another example of digging into practical ways in which to put into practice these spiritual teachings, in this case, in support of young people. So take a look at this. There's a QR code at the end. We encourage people to donate. And when we come back, we'll look at what the audience has to say.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Double your impact with our matching grant. Until the end of 2025, every tax-deductible donation to the Royal Falcon Foundation up to $1,000 will be matched dollar for dollar. Visit our website to donate now or email info@royalfalconfoundation.org for more details. Together, we can make a greater difference.
We're back in the studio with Anthony Winning, the founder of Life and Depth, at which you can visit lifeanddepth.com. It's in the chat. And we've been talking about what it means to be human and answering life's big questions. So looking for audience comments, there's still time if you want to throw one in there. Not a huge amount of audience interaction tonight. Perhaps we should have looked at this one at the time. That's a deep question to ask oneself. I wish more people did. I think this was going back to when you and I were talking about, who am I? Where do I come from? What's my purpose in life? As well as this idea of cognitive dissonance and what keeps us from getting answers that satisfy or move us forward in our quest and search. So let's just revisit that briefly about from your perspective in life and depth. What can people expect if they go to Life and Depth on this kind of question?
Well, there's definitely a few things I'm deep diving into. One is to try and explain through the stories of Genesis how come we are the way that we are. And I think that's a very big question. I also very much feel that there's the same essence at the bottom of the world's major religions, that there's some mysterious spark of divinity in all of us. And one way to view religion and maybe the purpose of life is to step closer towards that in some way or another. Of course, the question of how to do it, what pathway, how to go about it, these are not easy questions to answer. I think anytime we look at really deep and meaningful questions, we don't necessarily get easy answers. We might get pointed in a direction, but it's not something that's you're going to find a simple one answer. But yes, I also want to acknowledge, thank you for everyone for being here, in the sense of you are people who are trying to look more deeply, and that's something quite unusual and remarkable in my mind.
One comment I've made in the past is that sometimes we try to tell people, what the answer is, right? And if I'm heading towards the North Star, but I'm coming from the West, and I'm talking to somebody on the other side of it who's coming to it from the East, I'm like, well, just go towards, such and such, and then take a left. Well, that doesn't work, because left for them is the wrong direction, right? Oversimplified example of whatever is working for me, from where I'm coming from my experiences, from what I already understand, from what I already believe. The answer that takes me further, closer to that North Star, may not be the thing that takes somebody else closer. They may need to go the opposite way.
Yes.
To get closer to the North Star. They may have overshot it already with that approach that I'm taking.
Well, to put it in very Hinduistic and Buddhist terms, you may have completely different karma, and you might be distorting what's keeping you separate from that deeper truth in quite a different way. So yes, your approach would need to be different. But, I feel quite often in life, we just have to keep stepping forward, and we're not necessarily going to know at the time if it was right or wrong. There is a certain amount of, we're not going to see the path ahead. And yes, I think very much that looking, examining things, working on ourselves, it's all part of the process, and something we don't easily get confirmation or immediate recognition that, yes, that was right.
Well, and here's a comment from Gina along those lines. I can't wait to get them, though, the answers. I'm certain one day it will all be revealed. At least I hope so. Is that true?
I wouldn't know is the honest answer, because I don't have all the deep answers myself. But definitely, if I take kind of the Hinduistic and Buddhist perspective, eventually we will all go back to being part of the greater one consciousness, and then I believe we'll get all of the answers. But I have no direct experience of this myself to tell you.
Well,
It's just been, yeah.
perhaps to make it more practical, you can give an example of a moment in time as a seeker where you felt you in the right direction, where you had an epiphany, where something changed for you, or you reached a new level, or however you want to describe it.
Yeah, I think really I can look back on my life, and there's times that I think it really stretched me and pushed me. I mean, I really feel that the cost of our fears is, in a way, the beauty of life. And what do I mean about that? I was a very anxious and shy child. I was terrified of public speaking, and life kept putting me in situations where I had to go and speak in public. And on the one hand, it terrified me, but now that I look back on it, it's given me the opportunity to sit here and talk with yourself and to talk with other people. And I think, true growth comes out of that place where you can be maybe more at ease and more at comfort inside yourself, and just able more to accept yourself in life. So in my case, it was definitely the sheer fear of going up and having to give speeches and being terrified of it. But I can actually see both the difficulty and the beauty in that process. And that might be one small example of how in my life I believe I've stepped a little bit closer to the truth.
A couple other comments. We don't have, even though aren't a huge amount, we don't have time to deal with them all. But here was one where there'd probably be a lot less war if people were asking these deep questions. And then a companion thought from Angelo here. I agree with that, not necessarily the comment I just showed, but with another thing we were saying about dichotomies, right? People always try, science and religion, both versus one or the other. People always try and make something one or the other. Rarely both or multiple answers ever see the light of day as far as a possibility. So we live in a world of extreme polarization right now. It almost feels like here in America, more polarized than at any point perhaps since the Civil War in our nation, which was a horrible time in which 20 million Americans died, more than in all other wars combined in our Civil War. And we have this extreme polarization because people can't find commonality. And so how do we resolve this?
Well, the first observation I make is human beings seem to be addicted to drama. I think if we don't have drama, people find life boring, or they kind of wonder what is it all about. And I think the narrative, just as an idea between science and religion being in conflict, very much plays into that. You actually have to have very strong assumptions on science and religion to see them in conflict. But this kind of nuance, this kind of looking deeper, is not something that's going to sell newspapers. In terms of people, I really sort of feel, it's easy to look at the surface differences. Freud talked about the narcissism of minor differences, like how the Scottish will tell themselves they're so different to the English. And because they're Scottish and they eat haggis, well, how much of a Scottish person's life do they spend eating haggis? Not really much. It's something that grabs our attention, but it really isn't that big. And I think what we have to do is, when we see people, to humanize them, to realize, yes, they're going through their own struggles, but just like me, they wake up in the morning, they've got their difficulties, they've got their beautiful side, they've got some nice qualities. There's people whose lives they've influenced in a beautiful way. I think if we keep on the sort of the surface level about the drama and the arguments, it's going to be very difficult to get out of it. But just to really remember to listen to other people, and to sort of just remember there's a real human being there going through their day, just like yourself. So that's what I do for myself.
Yeah, thank you. Here, one last comment. We'll end on this one. Some people look forward to the drama. I steer clear of those folks, says Branstad. And this gets back to something you and I talked about, our own hypocrisy, the cognitive dissonance we live with, the truth about ourselves and who and what we are. I think it's true. There are people who may seem to need some of that tension and need some of that drama for whatever reason. You've seen statements in movies, right? Like, well, to make them feel alive, it makes them feel alive or something. Just to put a silly soundbite on something deep that's going on as to why we cause or seem to even want or crave drama amongst our fellow human beings.
Well, I can only sort of conclude there's something deeply conflicted in us. And whether you will look at Freud's account of the mind, the conflict between maybe our deep desires and what we believe is right and wrong, or really the conflict we might see that comes from the Garden of Eden, of there's parts of us that are unacceptable to God and to each other. It's something that
Cain and Abel, right? To go back to a story, right? The very first two children that are mentioned in the Genesis story, Cain and Abel, one ends up killing each other over a perceived, difference between how one is viewed by God.
Absolutely. We don't believe that we're unconditionally accepted, and we're in deep conflict about it. We're scared of being rejected. We're scared of not being liked or getting what we want. And, all that drama has to go somewhere. All of our internal drama has to go somewhere. And so, of course, we project it externally. All I can say is people like yourself and the people listening to the show and trying to look at things and to uncover and ask these questions and find out more, I think it's all part of a step towards, helping to lessen these things and hopefully find, I guess, a bit more inner peace inside of ourselves. But yes, I think on a very, very deep level, we're conflicted, we struggle to feel at ease and at peace in life, and that explains very much the world we see ourselves in.
Well, I'll share sort of a closing comment, and then I'll invite you to share yours. Sticking with this theme of Cain and Abel, I may have shared this with you. I've shared it a time or two here on the show. Something that occurred to me relatively recently is that the prodigal son story, to me, is a rewrite, a flipping of the script of the Cain and Abel story. Let me explain why. And Jesus does this a number of ways, like the Good Samaritan, right? He takes the presumed villain and makes the villain the hero, right? So here's why I think the prodigal son is a rewrite and a flipping of the script of Cain and Abel. In Cain and Abel brings an offering that's pleasing to God, and Cain doesn't. Cain gets jealous and kills his brother. That's the simple basis of the story. Jealousy, sibling rivalry, who is favored by the father. In the prodigal son leaves, squanders his inheritance, wine, women, and song, ends up in a pigsty with the pigs, comes crawling back to his dad for forgiveness. And the dad rushes out, puts a coat on, has a big feast to show the unconditional love and acceptance, right? And now the good son is jealous and envious of the bad son. That's why it's a flipping of the script. So Abel becomes Cain and Cain becomes Abel. The bad son becomes the good son becomes the bad son. And I think my comment on all this is, I teach this and this example, which it's my own. I've come up with it. I haven't read it anywhere else. It just occurred to me because I come from a fundamentalist background where you take some interpretation that was given to you, an interpretation that you have received from somebody else, and it becomes dogma. But then we go with that, and we end up in a ditch, right? And you have to be told to go in the other direction to get out of that ditch. And we briefly cross the center of the road heading for the other ditch. So we as a species lurch forward from ditch to ditch is the problem. Right? And we get these examples where God would reveal, here's what you should do, people run with it so much that, no, I didn't mean that, right? And then you have to be brought back the other way. And this is our lot in life, as to your point earlier on, it's hard to comprehend, it's deep. We'll never fully have all the answers. So that's sort of my closing comment, is to reach out to anyone who, I deeply, deeply believe the Bible is the Word of God, and I trust it.
Mhm.
But what I don't trust is my own understanding of it. And the more I study and the more I learn about it, the more I realize I didn't understand it. And there's so much more there, which keeps me studying it.
Well, absolutely. Going back to the Jewish tradition of Pardes, as you grow, shift, and develop, you will come to see new meaning in the same material, because how you change changes how you see and relate to life. And there's actually the deepest level in reading scripture is a mystery that cannot be expressed in words. It can only point us to a truth that cannot actually be captured, something that goes beyond intellectual understanding towards something experiential. So absolutely, it sounds to me like it's all part of the journey. And I think if we grow and develop, yes, we'll come to see things very differently as time goes on.
Thank you so much. I'm looking now up one thing, because you sparked something which I want to share here at the end. It's a prayer, and it's a Baha'i prayer, but I think you'll see why I'm looking for it. Hang on, I've got to just find it here, and it talks about this exact thing. Make firm our steps, O Lord, in thy path, and strengthen thou our hearts in thine obedience. Turn our faces toward the beauty of thy oneness, and gladden our bosoms with the signs of thy divine unity. Adorn our bodies with the robe of thy bounty, and remove from our eyes the veil of sinfulness. Give us the chalice of thy grace, that the essence of all beings may sing thy praise before the vision of thy grandeur. Reveal then thyself, O Lord, by thy merciful utterance, and the mystery of thy divine being, that the holy ecstasy of prayer may fill our souls. A prayer that shall rise above words and letters, and transcend the murmur of syllables and sounds, that all things may be merged into nothingness before the revelation of thy splendor. Just what you were saying brought this prayer to mind, so I had to share it.
Thank you very much. That was really quite touching. I very enjoyed listening to that. Thank you.
Well, let's let that then be the closing prayer for tonight. We don't necessarily always pray here, but came up very naturally. So, Anthony, I do hope we have occasion to have you back soon. Wish you all the best of success with life and depth, and we're gonna stay in touch with you and keep our audience appraised of what you're doing, and probably have you back.
That'd be wonderful. And really just a genuine note of appreciation to yourself and to all your listeners. I wish you very well on finding your way forward on the path, which is something I feel that we're all on. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you today. I absolutely enjoyed it.
We do have one more housekeeping order of business, and that is to show the sneak peek for next week's show. So we'll air this and conclude after that. Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you next week. Hey everyone, this is Wade Franson, host of Created in the Image of God. I am here with a very special guest today to record the sneak peek for episode 134. The topic here is love. And in 2018, Diane Hayworth received a direct download of the 4 Be Love principles, which she uses in her transformational work, bringing authenticity and direct connection and love to every conversation. We are honored to have her on the Created in the Image of God show. This is the sneak peek. Welcome to the studio, Diane.
Hi, Wade. I'm so excited to be here and to share these principles with your audience.
Well, and I can't wait either, but we're going to give them just a taste. So I want to know, what were the circumstances of that direct download? Where were you? How did that happen?
Well, I can tell you it wasn't anything I planned. I was actually in the middle of a conference and we were going through an exercise and we were asked to imagine we were seated on a foundation of love and to go inside and ask, love, what do you most want me to know today? And bam, I had a full body experience and received the principles.
That's amazing. And we're not going to, tell all, we're not going to spoil it for everybody by revealing what those principles are. But in general, what can they expect from the show when they tune in on January 21st for episode 134?
Well, I think you're going to be able to understand how everyday people, I'm a mom, I'm a grandmother, I run my own business, I am doing my best day by day to live a life of love. But I learned how to ask love to help me do that instead of trying to figure it out. And when I tapped into that internal and eternal place of love, that's when magic started to happen, like these experiences where I received the principles.
Well, my audience knows that I went on a 10-year mission search to find the answer to where are the people of God as defined in John 13:35, by this shall all men know you, that you have love one for another. And I literally traveled the world only to discover that this had to be practiced in my backyard. So wherever you are on this planet, you'll want to tune in and hear from Diane Hayworth about the 4 principles of being love that she received. So don't miss episode 134, airing January 21st. We'll see you there.